David Horowitz undertook his first political project when he was just 10 years old, born into a family of Marxist intellectuals. He later went on to become a co-founder of the New Left. Horowitz authored two of the movement's classic texts while also serving as editor of its leading magazine. But his tragic association with the Black Panthers led to a reversal of political alignments. Today, he is a so-called Second Thoughts conservative who heads the Center for the Study of Popular Culture. Radical Son is his memoir tracing the journey from a 60s revolutionary to one of the ex-radicals of his generation. And I am pleased to have him on this program because he has written sensitively and eloquently about his parents and his relationships and a lot of other things. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Great to have you back. Why radical? I mean, obviously, having given that introduction, why you called it Radical Son is obvious.
And there's a kind of play on Prodigal Son.
Yeah.
It's a book about returns. I set out as a radical. My parents were communists. I grew up in a community that was very alienated from America in a very basic way. I describe how my father would take me through the streets of the neighborhood and we would rename them when they were going to be after the revolution. And after a long arc, there's a story of my coming home and really feeling like I'm, in a way, the first Horowitz who set foot on American soil in an odd sort of way. And there's a story of reconciliation with my father beyond the grave.
What's
so
that
that's
story?
The Prodigal Son. Well, to discover after he had died, just a profound bond between us in terms of, this happened to be in terms of the women that we had given our hearts to. And it showed me how deep the genetic code is inside us. I discovered these papers after he was dead, his love letters and a diary. And it's so hard to move one's character an inch, as anybody who's tried to diet knows. and yet there we were as radicals setting out to move the whole world and transform human nature and, create a new man and new woman. And so this was kind of the lesson I learned in humility. It's like a kind of phrase from a movie that I liked a lot called "We All Loved Each Other So Much," where one of the radicals in it says, we tried to change the world, but the world changed us.
I'll stay with your father a second. Why do you think he was a Marxist, a communist?
I think a lot of people who are communists or socialists have kind of displaced feelings of a desire for community, for intimacy that they don't have. I found a lot of the memoirs by radicals to be very deficient in the personal side. You read Irving Howe, who was one of the most distinguished and intelligent radicals America's ever had. If you read his autobiography, you find very little out about him as a person. And I was determined in writing Radical Son, to overcome that. My own father was a very lonely man, a very depressed man. And I discovered his diary that he wrote when he was in the Soviet Union in 1932. And it was full of expressions of wanting to belong, of feeling he had become part of something in this very alien, very strange land that is, his own parents had fled. But the revolution made him feel a part of a larger community. And I so believe that so many radicals have that feeling of being included in the revolution as their family and the revolutionary community.
True for your mother as well.
And true for my mother as well, and for me. And it's one of the reasons I felt so betrayed when Betty Van Patter was murdered.
And you have to tell this story because this is an important story.
Yeah.
First, before we get to her murder, talk about the association with the Panthers. I mean, you came out of, you were in college.
I went to Berkeley in 1959. I was present at the creation of the New Left and participated in
free speech and all of that.
Exactly. And I was really avoided the Panthers in the 60s because my parents had been communists. The Panthers were always quoting Chairman Mao. I knew that was not the revolutionary path. They were
more radical chic than revolutionary.
That's right. They toted guns. There was a lot of talk of violence. It just wasn't something that I was attracted to. But in the 70s, Huey Newton, who was the leader of the Panthers, had said it's time to put away the gun and, as he put it, serve the people. And I became very involved in raising money for a school for the party. I called it the Oakland Community Learning Center. I bought a church in East Oakland. And I encouraged a woman named Betty Van Patter, who was the mother of 3 children and 42 years old at the time, so just slightly older than we were, to do the bookkeeping for the school. She had been my bookkeeper at Ramparts.
Yeah, Huey was not there at that time. Elaine Brown was running it?
Huey, what happened was Huey was there when I became involved,
yeah.
And then he fled after there was a series of incidents, the last of which was the shooting of an 18-year-old prostitute.
Right.
And he fled to Cuba. And of course, like everyone in the left at the time, I always discounted news reports when these things happened. It was the racist press. It was hostile forces that Huey was being set up by the police. But anyway, he fled to Cuba. He did murder that prostitute, as I discovered later. And then Elaine Brown took over the party. And when Elaine took over the party, Betty Van Patter, who was the bookkeeper of the school, suddenly was recruited to be the bookkeeper for the whole party. And she probably found out things that she shouldn't have known.
And she was disillusioned.
And, well, maybe she just was concerned. I don't think Betty understood who the Panthers were in a profound way. Anyway, she disappeared in December 1974, and her body was discovered in January by the police. Her head had been bashed in. And at that point, I described the process, the thought process by which I came to the conclusion. But by that point, I knew the Panthers had murdered her.
How did you know?
I knew, for various, I knew because the police, she had disappeared on a Friday from a local neighborhood bar. A black man had come with a note. And so that told me immediately it's got to be an organization. When I called the Panthers after she disappeared, Elaine Brown was not interested in Betty. I mean, I thought, here's a white woman. She's disappeared from the middle of the party. We have to find her because, the police hate the Panthers, the FBI. She was unconcerned with that. She just attacked Betty in a way that made me very suspicious. And she accused, when I said we have to find her, the police are investigating, she said, are you accusing me of a crime? And Betty knew too much. She said she was working for the CIA. All of this made my heart sink. Then the police investigation showed that Betty hadn't taken any, it was a Friday that she disappeared, hadn't taken any birth control pills, taken her credit card, so she wasn't going anywhere. She had just stopped in at the pub on the corner. I just knew, I had suppressed a lot of things about the Panthers. There were all those stories in the papers about drive-by shootings. There were all the things that Eldridge Cleaver was saying. And suddenly, it just...
And this was a turning point for you.
And that was a turning point. And then afterwards, I did a lot of investigation. I knew a lot of people in the Panther Party because I had worked with them. I talked to people. And eventually, it came out in my conversations with many people that, the party had a squad that was a hit squad inside. It was enforcers, that they had killed many people, and that they had killed Betty. And actually, one of the members of the squad, a man who was subsequently convicted of murder, named Bob Hurd, told people that they had killed Betty. And then I fed this information that I had to Kate Coleman, who was, still a member of the left, but a very courageous woman. She wrote an article for New Times magazine in '79, and she conducted her own investigations, and it corroborated what I had learned. And then Hal Lipset, who was a left-wing attorney, left-wing private eye, he was commissioned by the daughter of the murdered woman, Tamara, to investigate this. He came to the conclusion the Panthers did it. And then I describe, and in the Then my friend Ken Kelly, who was a member of the White Panthers, and was a confidant of Huey's. Huey told him that the Panthers killed Betty. And then I describe a bizarre lunch I had with Huey in 1980, where he identified Elaine Brown as the person who, ordered the murder.
Where did you go from the Black Panther disillusionment to where you are today? Take me through that journey.
Okay. First of all, I went through a profound personal dissolution, which is described in the book. My marriage of 20 years broke up. I was a
subsequent marriages broke up.
Right. I was a broken human being. I felt guilty over Betty's death. I felt that my whole life's work was futile and wrongheaded. And I sort of groped my way through various stages of disillusionment, not wanting to jump certainly to. I never dreamed I would, jump to the right or be a conservative, but just thinking through these issues. And again, part of the challenge in writing Radical Son was to explain how do you get from being a radical to voting for Ronald Reagan.
And that's what I'm trying to get at now.
And I did. I think it was partly the return, the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. I had made the mistake with Castro of thinking that he was a new leftist. The Sandinistas had created this dictatorship saying they were going to turn Nicaragua into a Cuba. I felt I've been here before and I can't be silent. And I felt that the Reagan administration was opposing the Sandinistas and the Democrats were, shilly-shallying over it. And, they put up the Boland Amendment. They opposed the Contras. Even the New Yorker, Paul Berman in the New Yorker has written that the Contras were the largest peasant army in the history of Latin America. They weren't a creature of the CIA. It was about land, and the Sandinistas had taken their land. So I felt fine about voting for Ronald Reagan. The profound change in me was, the shift I discovered was from viewing human nature as good, basically, to human nature as flawed and having the capacity for evil, which sounds simple, but I thought at that moment when Betty was killed or afterwards, I wish I had been given a doctrine of original sin, so I would understand that even if people have progressive ideas, the way Huey did, they could be dangerous criminals as well. And that's made me conservative.
Now, are you more anti-liberal or conservative?
I find great comfort in being a conservative. There is no party line. In my book, I describe how, Ollie North was a great hero of the American right at the time when I was becoming a conservative. Bill Safire wrote a column the week Ollie North was on television testifying, saying Ollie North should be put in jail. I waited for him to be drummed out of the conservative movement, and it never happened. And I said, this is a very expansive movement. I feel very comfortable intellectually. I don't have to look over my shoulder. I don't have to worry about my position, even on the big controversial issues like abortion. I will not be drummed out of the conservative movement for having deviant ideas.
What are your deviant ideas?
Well, I don't know. One, I guess, I believe that homosexuality is by nature, and therefore I don't have the moralistic view that a lot of conservatives do about people being homosexual. I feel homosexuals have the, need to have the same respect and rights.
Who is the enemy for you?
I don't. I don't see anybody as the enemy. I think that people have forgotten the principles on which this country was based. I think that we have gotten to a point. We have to realize that America as a pluralistic society cannot survive, for example, if we don't have a single standard for all Americans. Therefore, I find myself opposed to racial preferences and quotas, and to any group claims. And I think all these special rights, for example, there I will fit in with the conservatives, are destructive.
But then, we
need to recognize everybody as individuals.
I have not heard anything so far from you, who I've known for a long time,
that you would, yes,
that would make you make liberals and the left apoplectic.
I know, and I think...
And what's that about?
Part of it is I have, as I describe in the book, I adopted a new left style. And I, maybe in retrospect, I would have, done myself a better service if I hadn't. But I thought the left should understand how it feels to be, they call people baby killers. That was the new left. SDS was always calling Lyndon Johnson a baby killer. But I've walked into the Republican convention and had to act up, do the same thing. You're killing us, say to delegates, the Republican convention.
But that's no different than what some abortion activists have done. I
find, the Operation Rescue people remind me of the worst aspects of the New Left. I have to say, they don't have respect for other people's views. We live in a democracy in which people disagree with each other so profoundly that we have to have impose on ourselves a certain tolerance.
Who are your heroes today? They're in politics.
In politics?
Bill Bennett?
Yeah, Bill Bennett is somebody that I admire. I admire the much maligned Newt Gingrich. I feel the current political agenda in America is balancing the budget, protecting future generations, and welfare reform, which I believe anybody who's concerned about poor people in this country has got to want welfare reform. And Newt Gingrich is responsible for both of those.
Yeah. We once had a discussion about PBS on my show. You remember that? That
That's
discussion
right,
we
yes.
had about PBS? Because my argument with you at the time, as you remember, was that there ought to be programs. Everybody used to always use Buckley as an example, but there ought to be more aggressive programs, that conservatives ought to sort of be creating programs and trying to get funding for programs and doing that. But I haven't seen that necessarily happen, even though you've seen more conservatives, and some would argue there have been more conservative magazines created.
PBS is very, it's not running out there to conservatives. I feel...
But it's open to conservatives, it really is.
This show is, terrific. I believe that I would like to see more reaching out. I tried for many years to get PBS to fund a conservative front line. I think David Fanning does an excellent job in what he's doing, and he's done some. I'm impressed with some of the stuff he's done this year. Yeah. But I just feel that there should be a conservative home inside the public television and radio universe, and that means conservative producers and some funding for an inside show, not just you submit and have to, claw your way up like everybody else. Not like everybody else. But there were some powerful shows like Fanning that were created by the system. I think would be very helpful. We were talking before the show about the NEA. These institutions cannot see themselves as militant liberal institutions. Or, I often debate people and they'll say, well, the rest of the media is so conservative, public broadcasting has to be, is for the voiceless. But it can't be that way. The conservatives see the rest of the media as very liberal.
Yeah.
So I think if we make more of an outreach, if conservatives and liberals, do what John McCain has done, and what you do in having me on the show, a center could be recreated in American life, which I think. I'm remembering it in the 50s when I complained about it because it was all the Tweedledums and Tweedledees. But they did establish certain lines of process. That is, insisting on dialogue, insisting on civility. Manners turn out to be very important for holding a society together. And let the radicals on the ends, let them sort of, battle against the center. But I'd like to see that restored. David
Horowitz's book is Radical Son, Generational Odyssey. A lot of people have praised what he has talked about in describing his own evolution. Thank you very much, David.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.